So what's going on guys, Kids here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I will show you the best first Descendant tier list in 2024. In general, this game has a lot of unique classes and Descendants to play and choose from. But the big question is, what is the best and highest damage class? So we will take a look at all the new classes to see which one will suit your playstyle and dominate the current meta. And just before we start, a quick disclaimer. It is incredibly important to emphasize that just because the character is low in the tier list, it does not mean that you should completely ignore it. Any class in this game can perform very well if you put the time to learn it. Some just do better with a lot less effort. For the vast majority of cases, you should choose to bring the better player, not the better character. So I'm just making this video for educational purpose. And if this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then moving over to the first class, which is the Bunny, and we will place her right in the S tier. She is a massive damage dealer who sprints while discharging electricity. The more she runs, the greater the electrical energy she accumulates, allowing her to release the energy in a powerful shockwave. Like all the Descendants, she has one passive and 4 active skills. Her passive skill, called the Rabbit Foot, will charge electricity when moving, which inflicts damage to nearby enemies when landing after a double jump. Then as for her active skills, the first one is called the Thrill Explosion, which summons an electro orb that attacks nearby enemies and inflicts them with electrocute effect. Then the Lightning Speed skill will make your sprint speed increase significantly and acquire more electricity. Then the Lightning Emission skill will do that when you move around, it will deal damage to nearby enemies and inflict them with electrocute effect. And finally we have the Maximum Power ability, which will shoot out electricity forward to inflict damage, and your damage increases in proportion to the skill duration. Then for the second class we have the Valby, and she deserves to be placed in the S tier as well. She is a constant damage dealer who moves around freely through her water arch. She is a terrifying torrent to her enemies as she can summon a refreshing ocean wave. Her one and only passive skill is called the Water Intake, which when using skills while standing on water will consume less mana. Then as for her active skills, the first one is called the Bubble Bullet, which bounces a bubble bullet forward to create a small puddle. Enemies in that small puddle take continuous damage and are inflicted with laundry. Then the Plop Plop skill will create a large puddle where she is standing and then dive in. Valby then pops out at a selected location in the large puddle, and enemies in that large puddle take continuous damage and are inflicted with the laundry. Then the third skill is called Laundry, which will make your character become liquefied. While liquefied, she cannot take her feet off the ground or use skills, but she can move through enemies and her movement speed and defensives will increase. When moving while liquefied, she creates a path of water that deals continuous damage to enemies and inflicts laundry. And finally we have the Laundry Explosion, which changes the equipped weapon to the Laundry Explosion Launcher. When the launcher is fired, a laundry explosion is created, pulling in the enemies inflicted with laundry and dealing continuous damage. So then going over to the A tier, and the first class that deserves to be in here is the Freyna. She is a dot dealer, aka damage over time type of character, who freely manipulates venom. She can utilize the venomous substances produced by her body to trap enemies in swamps of toxins. Her passive skill is called the Contagious Links, that increases the toxic skill power by the number of nearby enemies inflicted with her poison. Then the first active skill is called the Toxic Trauma, that gives her the ability to throw poison to attack targeted enemy with damage and inflict room 0 trauma onto nearby enemies. And all of these new words and terms I will explain a bit later in the video. Then next we have the Defensive Mechanism, that significantly increases defensives. There is also a chance of inflicting room 0 trauma to enemies upon an attack. Then next up we have the Decomposed Poison skill, that will throw toxins to form a toxic swamp. Enemies entering the toxic swamp receive continuous damage and become inflicted with poison and venomous soaked. Enemies inflicted with the venom soaked leave the toxic footprints as they move, and enemies that touch toxic footprints also become inflicted with that poison. And finally we have the Venomous Baptism skill, which changes the current firearm to the Venom Baptism. Enemies hit with the venomous bullets are inflicted with room 0 trauma as well. Then for the next one we have the Gley, and we will place her right in the A tier. She is a utility damage dealer who becomes stronger the more she gnaws on herself. She can also unleash the rage inside her to quickly subdue her enemies. Her passive skill is called the Thirst, that creates life spheres upon killing enemies. This will recover HP and store power of life when absorbing life spheres. Then as for her active skills, the Frenzied will consume HP to enter the Berserk mode. In Berserk mode, long distance weapons, ATKs and penetration is increased. Then Life Siphon skill deals damage to nearby enemies and restores HP. In Berserk mode, your damage increases, but in normal mode, damage inflicted by enemies decreases for a short time. Then Increased Sensory skill will increase her sensory, that adds an infinite ammo effect for a certain amount of time during Frenzy, and when in a non-frenzied state, she will get increased movement speed and HP recovery. So then for the 5th class we have the Ajax, and we will place him right next to the Gley. He's a tank that utilizes void energy. He leads the team with a force field that protects allies while deflecting enemy attacks. His passive skill is called the Event Horizon, which helps him acquire void energy after using skills. When the void energy reaches its maximum amount, it enhances skills and grants additional effects. Then the first active skill is called the Orbit Barrier, that creates a shield in front of you. Durability increases proportional to Ajax HP and defensives, but if you are enhanced, then this will reflect damage proportional to defensives when enemies are hitting the barrier. Then the Void Walk skill will make your character leap into the air and land on the ground to strike nearby enemies by stunning them. If enhanced, this skill will also create max shields for a certain time. Then the Expulsion skill will strike nearby enemies, knocking them back, and again if enhanced, knockback range and max shields are increased. And then lastly we have the Hypercube, which creates a dome-shaped shield. The durability increases proportional to Ajax HP and defensives, but if enhanced it will also reflect damage proportional to defensives to the enemies hitting the barrier. Then taking a closer look at the next A-tier class, and it is the Jayber. He is a utility type of DPS character who uses turrets. His playstyle is summoning turrets for damage and defensives, and when the turrets are enhanced by the multi-purpose guns, he can fight even more effectively. His passive skill is called the Turret Sync, which makes that your ATK increases when Assault Turret and Medical Turrets are both active. His first active skill is called the Assault Turret, that summons an Assault Turret to attack the enemy, and if enhanced, it launches attacks into nearby area. Then next up we have the Medical Turret, which summons a Medical Turret to heal allies and distract enemies. If enhanced, it restores mana. Then the Multipurpose Gun changes gun into a multipurpose one, and if hit by it, the turrets will enter an enhanced state. And finally we have the Reactive, which recalls all summoned turrets and inflicts powerful damage to nearby enemies. After using the Total Recall, you will enter the Overhaul state, where turrets are summoned in their enhanced states. Then next up we have the Lepic, that we will place him right in the A tier. He is a DPS character who uses grenades to attack. He can clear the battlefield with his tactical prosthetic arm and grenades, which give him a powerful performance. Then the one and only passive skill is the Close Call, which makes that there is a chance of surviving fatal damage during a battle. Then the first active skill is called the Grenade, which throws a grenade forward at the enemy. You will get extra burns when the Overclock is active. Then next up we have the Overclock skill, which increases all skills ATK and adds up a burn effect to grenade, and overkill for a set duration. Then the Traction Grenade will shove a grenade forward to pull the enemies within a range. And then finally we have the Overkill skill, which fires a powerful shell at the enemy. The shell is maintained at the landing point for some time while inflicting constant damage, and you can get extra burns if the Overclock is active. And then for the last and final A-tier character we have the Esiemo. He is a burst DPS character who handles explosives. He also attaches TNT to enemies and detonates them at the right opportunity. His passive skill is called the Advantageous Habit, that drops a TNT on the ground when the shield is completely depleted. Then the first active skill is called the Active TNT, which launches a sticky grenade forward. This grenade attaches to an enemy on a terrain and deals bunch of damage. Then the Blast skill instantly detonates attached grenades. Their damage increases with the number of attached grenades. Then the Guided Landmine skill places a guided landmine at the current location. The guided landmine will fly to an enemy within its detection range and attach to it. And finally we have the arc explosion, that makes your character move forward extremely fast. On the collision with an enemy while charging, it will inflict knockback, and when the movement ends, it will also deal damage to nearby enemies and remove buffs from them. So then moving over to the B tier, and the first class that deserves to be in here is the Sharen. She is an assassin type of melee class with electric arc. By her using the camouflage, she can close the distance to her enemies whenever she desires and ambush enemies anytime and anywhere. Then for the passive skill we have the Assassinator, whose damage increases when attacking enemy that is not attacking your character, and killing enemies with a skill in the ambush state resets cooldowns for the active camouflage. Then the first active skill is called the Cut-Off Beam, which attacks enemy with the electric blade to deal damage and inflict them with electrocute effect. Then the second one is called the Active Camouflage, which can help you to hide from the enemies. When attacking or using skills while in the active camouflage state, it will end immediately, regardless of the time remaining. When active camouflage state ends, Sharen enters the ambush mode, increasing damage of her next attack. Then the impact round skill will launch built-in explosives forward for her arm to stun the enemies. And finally we have the Flash Short Sword that targets enemies within aiming range and throws multiple knives to attack them. Knives explode to inflict enemies with damage in the electrocute effect. Then next up we have the Viessa, and we will place her right in the B tier as well. She is a debuffer type of character who can use chill at will. She can use her unique attribute called Chill to freeze enemies in a place, unleashing cold snap-like attacks as she weaves her way between them. Her passive skill is called the Ice Sphere. This will create an ice sphere floating around her body, which will inflict enemies with the Ice Shackle effect. The ice sphere will automatically fly towards nearby enemies and deal damage to the target and its surroundings. Her first active skill is called the Frost Shards, that fires an exploding ice beam, inflicting damage and ice shackle around the area it hits. Then the Frost Road skill increases running speed and shield, and creates ice sheets on the ground where Viessa stands. When enemies come into contact with these ice sheets, they are inflicted with the Ice Shackle. Then Cold Snap skill will release an arc of cold air in front, inflicting damage and Ice Shackle. And finally we have the Blizzard ability, which creates a snowstorm that explodes over time, inflicting damage and Ice Shackle on enemies caught within. Then moving over to the Yujin, and we will place her right next to the Viessa. He is the healer class that uses his selected drones to heal allies. He can heal allies and grant them beneficial buffs after determining the distance between the allies and himself. The one and only passive skill is the Stop Overreacting, which significantly reduces the time to rescue allies. The targets that you rescue will get their max HP increased. Then the first active skill is called the Solidarity Healing, which summons a recovery drone that attaches to allies and heals them. It can also recover the targets and increase their ATK through the acceleration effect. Then the Rescue Serum skill fires a Rescue Serum forward, decreasing defensives and inflicting allergy. When attacking enemies with the allergy, it will heal nearby allies and grant additional healing to the teammates who killed the enemy. Then the Stimulant Spray skill grants a stimulation to allies. While this is active, incoming damage is reduced, and recovery is received when the stimulation ends. And finally we have the Hyper-Reactive Healing Round that can heal yourself and allies, granting them purification and immunity to remove and prevent debuffs. Additionally, the HP recovery is based on the number of allies and enemies within the range. And then for the last and final B tier class we have the Enzo, and this is a support type of character who uses supply drones. He can command the battlefield by supplying ammo to allies while launching long-range attacks with drones at the same time. His passive skill is called the Shot Support, which grants fire support to allies within the area around Enzo, increasing their max ammo capacity. The efficiency of this effect increases marginally with the number of Enzos in the squad. Then for the first active skill we have the Start Supply that summons a bullet supplying device at the designated location. This will supply bullets to allies that approach the device. The bullet supplying device can be used once by each ally, and it will disappear when everyone has used it once or its duration ends. Next up we have the Explosive Drone that launches an explosive drone forward. The drone explodes on the contact with the enemy or on a terrain object, dealing damage. Then Enhanced Combat Suit skill will summon a shield recovery comms it will recover Enzo's energy shield by a certain amount. Then it will continue to recover the energy shield through the enhanced combat suit effect. And finally we have the perfect support, which summons a small supply ship to himself and his allies. This ship time over time will provide supply bullets and grant perfect support to allies. The small supply ship attacks enemies in front while it's active, and when the skill ends, it fires a missile forward that causes a big explosion. So then moving over to the C tier, in the first class that deserves to be in here is Kyle. He's a bruiser who interestingly enough is a damage dealing tank who generates and manipulates magnetic fields. He can create a barrier or radiation magnetic force to push enemies back and serve as a strong shield for his teammates. His passive skill is called the Experience Technician, which helps him acquire magnetic force through skills. When his shields are completely depleted, he can recover shields and the magnetic force over a certain period of time. Then his active skill is called the Repulsion Dash, which dashes towards the enemies, dealing damage and recovering the magnetic force. Then the Magnetic Bulwark creates a frontal barrier that protects against enemy attacks. He will recover magnetic force depending on the type of projectiles blocked. Then the Magnetism Spurskill will do that. When you are taking damage, magnetic force is reduced instead of your HP or shields. After a certain period of time, magnetic force detonates to deal damage around your character. And last but not the least, we have the Superconductivity Thrusters, which is a skill that allows you to fly. When you land, it deals damage in an area around his landing zone, consuming all the accumulated magnetic force. The damage dealt is proportional to the amount of magnetic force consumed. And then for the last and final C tier class, we have the Blair, that deals continuous damage and who manipulates fire. He gains energy by adjusting firepower, and the hot dishes he throws traps the enemies internally into a flame zone. Then for his passive skill, we have the Pitmaster, which increases your critical hit damage when attacking enemies in a burn state, and your critical hit chance increases depending on the number of stoves in the battlefield. Then the first active skill is called the Blaze Up, which spurts flames to deal damage to nearby enemies and create a stove. The stove will inflict constant damage and burn nearby enemies. Then the Extinguishing skill will retrieve stoves in the battlefield and restore mana. Retrieving stoves increases defensives for a short period of time. Then the Burn State skill will release flames forward. Enemies near the flame's arrival point are inflicted with constant damage and burn effect. And finally we have the Deadly Cuisine, which throws a large fireball forward. Then the large fireball splits into small fireballs, causing extra explosions. Explosion damage inflicts burn effect and creates a stove on the ground. This stove will also deal constant damage to nearby enemies and inflict them with the burn effect. So with that said, I really do appreciate everyone for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions or suggestions for the next video, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and not miss any more amazing content. With that said, you have an amazing day and I will see you in the next one. So take it easy, peace.